What's up, YouTube? So today I want to talk about a really cool technique for turning organic instruments into playable Serum patches within minutes. So here I've got a South American style flute. I'm not sure if this is like a actual traditional one or like a curio shop thing because it doesn't play too well. And I kind of got it for cheap at like a thrift shop locally here. Regardless, one of the cool things about this method is if you have one of these instruments which is kind of doesn't play very well but it has a really cool sound, you can turn it into a synth patch and play it with your keyboard where it's much easier to do so and still get that kind of really nice organic sound. One thing I think that's particularly special about flutes and wind instruments in general is their really complex harmonic nature. And often with wavetables and traditional synth methods, you kind of struggle to get that really complex harmonics, right? The Spectral Oscillator in Serum 2 pretty much changed that. So I want to show you how I usually go about turning stuff like this into actual playable synth patches. So let's dive in and have a look. So usually what I want to do is I want to record in a single note, kind of longish single note, like a legato, and try get as much of the harmonic nature. So if you don't know too much about flutes, the harder you blow, the more likely you are to kind of push into that upper harmonic and get like a sort of octave sound. The thing with wooden flutes, though, is that kind of octave or those higher harmonics are very often not tuned exactly to ratios and that kind of thing because it's a natural surface. There's all sorts of grain interfering with the signal and stuff. So you never really get an exact tuned harmonic ratio. But I think that's kind of what's special about it. It kind of gives you that almost haunting wind-like sound on the top end, but a very stable kind of fundamental. And so you want to record in one long legato note, but try get as much of that harmonic variation within that one note, right? And so while we're at it, I'm just going to record another sample from this flute. Okay, cool. So we've got our samples here inside Bitwig. I've actually run them through Isotope RX's spectral denoiser. I'm not going to go through that process. I briefly explained it in the last Serum 2 video. It might be boring for those who maybe don't have Isotope RX and can just record a really nice clean signal straight off the bat. These kinds of things are quite nice to kind of really clean it up though, because, you know, when you're using that spectral synth, you're going to get a little bit more of that dirt coming through if you don't clean up the sound, right? So we could potentially drag the sample and drop it in the oscillator and set it to spectral here like this. But I usually prefer actually just putting the sample into the Serum preset folder. That way I can use it, you know, whenever I need it. But also we can set up a thing. Also, I explained it in the previous Serum video where if you put the root note at the end of the sample, it'll automatically detect it and key track the note specifically depending on that. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to just open up my Explorer and we can drag these two and then we can go to Serum and we can say open Serum 2 presets folder. We want to go to samples, user. I'm just going to drop it here for now. And then we want to make sure that that root note is the last thing in the name. So, you know, Bitwig by default puts the bounce 1, bounce 2 suffix. So we just want to remove that. So it's like, so then what we can do is back in Serum, we can, let's just initialize, and then let's set the oscillator mode over to spectral, and then we can just run through those and find the actual sample. So for example, SAF, that's the South American style flute, this one over here. I know the difference. I mean, I'm guessing obviously, but usually this little thing at the top here, that technique is called a fipple. And that's more common with South American style flutes, whereas North American style flutes often have a little block on top to direct the airflow. Again, I'm kind of just, I'm guessing, but also the art kind of looks a little bit more South American. The guy's playing pan flutes. Anyway, that doesn't really matter. So here, what we can do is we can have a look at Serum and we can actually see the harmonic structure over here, you can see we've got that long root note at the bottom there. We can just play this straight away. And we can even like adjust the rate at which it plays through the sample. And we can get different keys by just playing different notes. So we've already kind of resynthesized it, right? But I like to set this to manual mode and then set up different envelopes and stuff to move through the sample. So we can have the initial envelope, which kind of does that first harmonic overblow as you start the note. And then here it's going to hover around the middle. And then as we apply maybe more aftertouch or something like that, we can set the position to move there. You can see there's where we overblow it to get those other harmonics, right? So what I usually like to do is actually cut out this fundamental entirely. And you can see it's actually going to be pretty easy because we have this filter here and there's not much going on below it. So we can use the readout to actually just see what frequency or where we want to apply almost like a low cut filter. And so this line in the spectral filter represents the harmonic balance. So you can see here now we've removed that low fundamental and we can adjust it ever so slightly with this cut if we need to, but it's pretty on the dot where it is right now. And so now we've basically isolated just those overtones. Pretty sick. Okay, so now what we can do is we can actually just set up a basic sine wave. And that should technically replace, you know, if the key tracking and everything was right, it should replace where that low frequency was. Let's just see. Yeah, it is more or less there. The only difference is here we have a little bit of attack. So we can still hear the transient on this sine wave. And here we want the full attack. So I'm not going to use this main envelope. I'm going to use envelope 2 to modulate this level of just the sine wave. And so we can give this some attack like this to kind of simulate that fundamental kicking in a couple of milliseconds late, you know. Cool. So what I want to do is I want to give it a little bit of randomization here on this position. Let's set it somewhere like this. Let's go with maybe the Rosler. And that's just going to give us a little bit of that kind of organic movement as we modulate it a little bit. But yeah, we also want to link this to envelope 2 in the matrix here. So I will explain exactly what I'm doing there. So let's say LFO1 position to envelope 2. Because we don't want that movement at the beginning of the sound. We want to slowly mix in that movement. And then at the beginning of the sound, what we can do is we can create an envelope that's going to modulate that position. So let's set it this way and give it a decay. This way, what we can do is we can now set up a random or something like a velocity or something that's going to slightly change this decay. You see here we get the quicker kind of, and then with a longer decay, the kind of overtone slides in a little bit longer. And so what we can do is we can actually link these, this attack and this decay, so that they kind of have, you know, when the one is longer, it takes longer for that fundamental to kind of kick in as well. So it gives you a slightly more organic effect. So let's go like this, and let's say maybe to about 750 milliseconds. And then the same thing with the decay to about around there. And let's call this attack. Let's put a little bit of effects on here, maybe just a reverb. Okay, so one thing about flutes is that they have a very much legato nature. You'll notice that when you start blowing, you get that slight harmonics, but then as you change the note, you don't get that transient on every note. It slides into the next note ever so slightly. And so this is another reason why I really like to split the spectral so that we're doing the fundamental on its own, because you get a much more, a much nicer legato effect with the traditional wavetables than you do with like a spectral oscillator. This, you can kind of hear these steps in the process. So here, if we say mono, legato, give it a bit of portamento and set the curve down, you can hear this carries on playing when we change to a new note. And only when we start a note do we get that poof blow. Okay, cool. So let's do the overblow harmonics. So here with macro 1, let's set this to position. And now what we want to do is we want to use this to kind of position it just at that spot there. Okay, we've gone too far. Okay, so what I also want to do is I want to set this LFO into hertz. And then this macro, what I want to do is set it so that when we turn it, it turns this down to 0. So it stops moving, right? Kind of similar to what we did with that envelope, but here we wanted to stop moving round about this spot here. So we can give it a little bit of movement, maybe not 0, like 0.001. So kind of move slightly. Okay, let's give it some more delay before the reverb. I think the portamento kicks in a bit. I think we got to bend this up. Okay, so I've also figured out here on this envelope that's controlling this fundamental, like the wavetable, if we set this to legato inverted, then this envelope acts traditionally. So the fundamental doesn't kick in every time. We kind of get this more gradual in of the fundamental, gradual attack. So we get a slightly more realistic sound that way if we set this envelope to legato inverted. So we can really hear the difference with portamento on high. You see, it restarts that envelope every time regardless of the legato setting, which is pretty cool. Cool. Okay, so once we've set up that patch, technically all we need to do is load up the other sound, and it should give or take work. You may need to just adjust this cutoff ever so slightly to remove that fundamental, or you may find that you have another strong overtone. Like, for example, here, we've got the fundamental and the first overtone, which are quite present. So in this one, what we can do is we can actually create another oscillator. So we can go copy with mods, paste, and then this one should be an octave higher. And I've also kind of, with these ones, I often like to modulate the level with a bit of random as well. So instead of this, let's use like the Y here and just give it a bit of level modulation as well. And then don't go as high in volume. So this one kind of flutters a little bit in and out in terms of the level. Okay, that about sums it up. I mean, we're not limited to just doing this. You know, we could take it a lot further. We could experiment. We could, you know, do all sorts of like weird spectral warp modes and stuff to get like more otherworldly sounds. But I'm going to leave that in your hands. You know, experiment, see what you come up with, record all sorts of crazy stuff and turn it into Serum synth patches. Yeah, so I'm going to leave it there for today. I hope you guys enjoyed that. I'm going to be uploading these 2 presets to my Patreon for all my $5 supporters. So if you want to know what that's all about, check out the link in the description. And thank you for watching. I'll see you guys next time. Cheers. Don't forget that like button and subscribe to my channel if you haven't yet. I'll see you guys next time. Cheers.